Of the strongmen leaders out there, who's the one that actually kind of appeals to you the most?
Gosh, that is difficult. I wouldn't say, I'm now running desperately through my head. I certainly don't like Putin for obvious reasons.
I'll go
through my column. Come on. No, I'm waiting for one to come up that I can approve of. Putin, no. Erdogan, no. Erdogan is just, a friend of mine's just been in prison for 18 years.
Well, that'll make you like him less, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, no, not the friend. I mean, Erdogan, yeah.
I can't say I'm particularly fond of. Who are we getting to? Modi, I think, is an interesting figure. I mean, I actually increasingly think he's a sinister figure, but you can make a case that, he is elected, he is genuinely popular, he is trying to kind of mobilize a sense that India's on the move, is modernized, and so on. And he hasn't done, the kind of worst fears about Modi have not yet been realized. There hasn't been mass communal violence or mass imprisonment, although people are concerned about it. But I think he's had a pretty negative effect on media freedom. People are a little worried about the courts in India. So it's hard to say he's entirely positive. But Boris Johnson, I was attacked for including in the book. And it was a slightly marginal call. But I think Brexit and Trump are linked phenomena. So I had to I felt that you had to kind of discuss it. Bolsonaro is a kind of a bit of a joke, really. It's hard to say.
So Modi's the one that potentially appeals to you.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say even that.
Because he's standing up for India, because on the global stage, because his economic policies have been more successful. What is it that where is it that you'd give him credit? Where is it that you'd say, yeah, I kind of get that?
Look, I mean, as I say, I'm not a fan of the guy.
No, I get it.
But I think
no one's the villain of their own story, right? And so, I mean, when you write a book like this, you want to try to understand the narrative. And when you do that, sometimes you say, okay, I see that. Or, yeah, that kind of resonates
I think another thing you could say about Modi, and one of the reasons that he's popular, and actually one of the reasons why I think I mistakenly said in 2014 he was worth a try, and I now slightly regret having said that. But actually, even Obama said that, 2015 was writing essays about what a great guy.
And said we should let him in, and remember, totally. Because he was on the blacklist, and then they said, no, we're going to give him a visa.
And said, I think he said something like he represents the promise of a new India and all that. And I think the fact that he has come from genuinely humble background is he
isn't corrupt.
Yeah,
personally.
He isn't personally corrupt. And also, there was something a little odd that, in this country of 1.3 billion people, that the ruling elite was seemed to be such a narrow group of people. And I think that he's an unusual Indian leader, that he's genuinely come from the lower middle class. And he obviously has a rapport with huge numbers of Indians. And I think that one of the arguments you can make about populism and the relationship of strongman leaders to populism is that people like me can sort of say effectively, this is sinful, you shouldn't go anywhere near it. But they are actually identifying real sentiments
demand,
out there.
Real grievance.
Absolutely. And they are often right that the globalist elite, of which the two of us epitomize, are out of touch. They get something. I mean, so it was interesting ahead of the French election where, people thought Le Pen might be the first female strongwoman. And I was talking to a French political analyst who, again, was not going to vote for Le Pen, but he said, look, the far right has been building and building and building in France over 20, 30 years. And
did again in the last election.
And just keep going. And he said, maybe in a democratic system, ultimately, they have to be given a try. I'm not sure I agree, because I think that if they get given a try, you may not get another try. But that is an argument that these leaders often are popular, and you've got to ask yourself why.
Well, there's another argument, of course, which is that if you see these movements growing as a responsible leader that believes in rule of law, if you don't do anything and take the bold, courageous, maybe steps that will get you voted out to actually start providing for disenfranchised people in your country, then you are ultimately responsible for the rise of the strongman.
Yeah, no, and I think that, democratic or liberal leaders face a series of dilemmas about what parts of these agenda should I actually try to deal with, and appropriate and so on. You can see it on migration, where countries like Australia and Denmark for example, have adopted very draconian migration policies that would have appalled liberal opinion 10, 15 years ago, and do still to some extent. But I think because they say, well, this is what our populations want, and if we don't do it, somebody else, some more extreme, will take up the banner.